Now I would like to hand over to Juan, who will moderate the panelists' discussion. Juan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jimena, and thank you very much for inviting me to this really milestone in TADAT. Something that, thank you, Paul, for the presentation. Something you forgot to mention is that when you came to the fund, you went to my office and said, okay, we need to develop this. And we started the journey, as people like to say. And just to give a little bit of additional background, historical background, we initiated the TADAT development somehow in response to a request from the PFA steering committee. Because the PFA steering committee, as those familiar with PFA framework, has just 3 indicators on the tax administration side. So we met the PFA steering committee and said, why don't we develop a drill down tool for tax administration? We did the assessment. I said, okay, it's possible, but it's not going to be a drill down tool. It will be a sister framework because the tax administration system is as complex as what PFA is measuring. And this is the way we initiated the journey. And I would like to introduce the topic and the panelists, but first making a couple of comments regarding the future exercise. And Paul did a very good description of how the future exercise is ongoing. One aspect is remind us ourselves what I mentioned in the intervention before, that TADAT framework, again, is about how we measure the performance of our revenue administration, tax administration system. And the way to do this is try to focus on outcomes. So when we don't have robust outcome indicators, then we go to practices of countries that's supposed to deliver well. So in this regard, for example, thinking now in the GovTech as a dimension that kind of more developed administration has been incorporating in order to produce better outcomes. So we shouldn't lose focus on that ultimately we want the outcome part, because GovTech cut across many of the POAs. So when we are talking about filing and payment, for example, if you are digitalized, you have a much better outcome versus not having. If you are talking about the effectiveness of a tax administration, if you have good database, data mining, et cetera, you will have better outcome on effectiveness. But the ultimate goal is the outcome, is not the fancy IT systems. So I think this is something I would like to stress. The second part I would like to stress is the idea of the repeat assessment. And this is something that we need to think further in the following sense. There was a presentation or intervention by the DG Reform representative. We have been working with DG Reform in Southeast Europe with the notion that by default, when we plan a TADAT assessment, there is already a TADAT follow-up assessment already in the plan. Because TADAT, in addition to be a diagnostic of a tax administration, also is a way to measure progress with reform agendas. So in this sense, I think we will need to work more on this because only 1/5 of the 150 something TADAT has been repeated. So it's a very low proportion. So in this sense, looking ahead, when we plan a TADAT, we should immediately discuss with the authorities, okay, we should plan a TADAT, let's say 3 years on the road, because we are going to embark in a reform agenda, and we want to have the similar framework for measuring if we have made progress. That's the rationale behind. So it shouldn't be seen in isolation. And in addition, not to be seen in isolation from that perspective, also it shouldn't be seen in isolation from the more broad tax system reform. And here I make the link with the so-called medium-term revenue strategy. What we are trying to help countries is to have better tax systems. And by tax system, we are talking about the policy framework, the administration framework, the legal framework. And this is where we have been developing in the Platform for Collaboration on Tax, the concept of the medium-term revenue strategy that has the whole component of the tax system, including the tax administration system. So in this sense, it's very important to place TADAT reform agenda that are kind of driven by TADAT and TADAT reassessment in the context of the tax system reform. Because ultimately, it's very important for us is to place the tax administration reform in the overall context, trying that the whole government embrace the reform in this regard, because it will have more support. We know that tax administration compliance is very complex, particularly when you touch vested interest. That's why you need a broader context. It cannot be seen in isolation, just a tax administration exercise. This is too short, so we need to put it in that broad context. Okay, so for this panel, I have 5 distinguished panelists. And on my right, we have Deborah Adams, Division Chief of Revenue Administration 1 in FAD. Next is Tuan-Mi Lee, Lead Economist, World Bank. To my side, Monica Caligiuri, Sector Lead Specialist, Tax Administration, Inter-American Development Bank. On my left, I have Marina Rocha, Executive Project Lead, Brazilian Revenue Administration. And on my left as well, Kozue Ichijama, Public Management Specialist, Asian Development Bank. So we have a good variety of thinking here, and I'm going to exploit this. We're supposed to finish this panel by 5:10. So I will ask the panelists to be sharp, precise in their responses. So Deborah, starting with you. So in the presentation, Paul makes some reference, not so explicitly, but what we have heard is that there is some people requesting that TADAT go to the next steps, meaning developing sort of a reform, assessment, et cetera, et cetera. As a CD providers, because Revenue Administration Division really leads a lot of TADAT, what are your thoughts on this? Do you think the 9 POAs, the core taxes, and the TADAT scoring methodology remain relevant today? Deborah?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. I find it, I may not sound it, but I'm quite excited. And because at the IMF, we really feel that the TADAT is an invaluable tool as part of our capacity development. It really is. It's one of the main tools we use to assess baseline performance and identify the weakest areas in a tax administration. But of course, it's not just about the results, the scoring. As someone said earlier, perhaps the scoring is sort of something we shouldn't be so focused on. It's what you do next. And I very much appreciated the Commissioner General from Zambia giving us almost a case study of what you do next. You take that information. And we would always encourage countries to take a pause and not go, you know, you get your scores and your results one day and the next day you plan your future. No, take a pause, take a beat, think about the results, and then go to the next steps once you've had a chance to absorb this. And I also don't support TADAT itself being the means to do the next stage of your reform planning and setting your reform agenda. There are many people representing organizations on this stage and in the audience here who are already doing excellent work in this space to help tax administrations around the world go that next step to develop their own reform agenda. And many of us have a trusted advisor relationship with countries already. So there may be, I really liked the data about mixed teams from different institutions supporting TADATs in countries. And amongst those teams, there's likely to be one sort of more, you know, the trusted advisor who's the first person who has sort of the strategic advice. And they're probably the best person or best institution placed to take the country forward with their reform agenda. I'm trying to be quick one. Okay. I think actually Gabriella from the EC also gave a good example there of that trusted advisor role. So much of what I wanted to say has already been said by others, but I think that means with so many partners, so many stakeholders feeling very strongly in a positive way about this tool, we're all using it to take our support forward with countries. On your question on relevance, and I appreciated Paul's discussion there. The issue is keeping TADAT up to date with the evolution of good practices in tax administration. And I know working with some of the more highly digitalized tax administrations, you know, and you talked about evolving technologies, TADAT has to keep up that. But one of my mantras is about keeping the basics, you know, getting the basics right. And I really think TADAT can't lose sight, can't lose focus, can't skip over an assessment of are the basic foundations of good tax administration across the core functions in place. And I think it does that very well and needs to not lose that. Many administrations, they come to us and they want to do something clever with AI or machine learning. And then when we start working with them, we realize they don't have any of the foundations in place of their compliance risk management or their analytics or their data to even think about that. So I think TADAT brings us back to those basics. And I certainly would see a continuing focus on the core national taxes. This is where the revenue is. This is why countries want their tax system to be working efficiently, is to collect the maximum revenue. Briefly on scoring, I think the scoring is generally sound. I'm interested there's been so much feedback on scoring, so I'd be interested perhaps to hear a bit more at some stage about that. So yes, appreciate that it can be reviewed and you know, keeping dimensions and indicators as up to date as possible would be probably my main comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Tuan, Modesta showed us some statistic where we have more than 150 TADAT assessment, but only 1/5 of them has been repeated, so 28, something like that. So what action can be taken and by whom to continue to expand the TADAT footprint across the world? So your views.
Thank you for your question. And before I go into directly to your question, let me first reaffirm, you know, the line of the presentation that Modest already made in the previous section, the relevancy and utility of the TADAT as the global preferred diagnostic tool, and the bank using that, and, you know, we extending that. And we are very proud. You know, the bank has been like the partner since the early days of TADAT. And before we talk about like the what donors or what the development partners community can do to support like the expanding the TADAT footprint globally, let us also understand a little bit about the challenges at hand. And, you know, the actions that are useful, that are also the actions that need to mitigate the risk arising from those challenges. So in this, you know, very quick, talk, I would like to mention only about two groups of the challenges. One is revenue administration reforms, or revenue reforms in general are always highly politically charged. And, you know, in our World Bank review of the lending operations, resistant to change or resistant to reform, change management always pose some sort of the barrier to reforms. And the second part that is really about the fragmentation to the concept of reforms. Within the revenue administration, in many cases that we can observe, that revenue administrations really are averse to comprehensive reforms. They may look at a certain part of like institutional reforms, you know, maybe change management, HR, but not looking at, say, you know, business processing, process re-engineering, or maybe ICT, digitalization, and so on, that Deborah also mentioned, you know, briefly in your talk. And within the Ministry of Finance, tax policy department and tax administration agency may not always agree on the setting and also the priorities and also the sequencing for reforms. We see that in the challenging to establish the MTRS, a midterm revenue strategy. So there is a lack of the concerted efforts on the Ministry of Finance side, to really, and also revenue administration side, to demand like for rigorous diagnostics, including the TADAT. Now, to mitigate those challenges, the risk from those challenges, I would think of 3 main groups of actions. And those of the actions are also behind the concept about new World Bank TADAT project. One, a ground-up approach. We, from our own experience, on the ground, effective conversation, dialogues with Revenue Administration, Tax Policy Department, Minister of Finance could help us garner some sort of the political commitment at the highest level. And we also encourage the Minister of Finance to engage in wider stakeholder participation. And so that is really the pressure on reforms and also trigger the demand for TADAT. And the other part that I would like to mention in here, that's another action that is really linking TADAT with the following up or maybe complementary TA lending operations. I'm very happy that Andrea and other people, other panelists in the previous session already mentioned, and also you also mentioned, touch upon that. We need not look at TADAT as isolated one-off action. It has to be used as the basis or the baseline for to support capacity building on the IMF side, or maybe lending analytical support from at the World Bank side. And the last part I would like to, the last kind of action that I would like to emphasize in here is really we need to work together. We need to ramp up our collaboration with the TADAT Secretariat among the TADAT partners and with all the technical assistance providers. We want to speak in one voice. We want to make sure that the TADAT, country TADATs are of consistency and high quality. And we want to support countries to cross-fertilize the lessons learned from TADAT assessment through jointly organizing some sort of regional global events where the administrations can sit together and they can exchange knowledge and experience.
Thank you. Monica, you have a lot of experience in working in Latin American countries where tax administration has been very innovative. To what extent can this innovation contribute to the updating of the TADAT framework, which is ongoing? So Paul could pay attention to this part.
Thank you, Juan. And firstly, I would like to thank to TADAT Secretariat for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. Respond to your question. There are some biggest problems now in the region that I can mention some. For example, tax evasion, fraud, shadow economy, and there are others. But in order to address these problems that tax administration has to dealing with every day, but that's the problems of tax administration. And it leads to a low revenue collection. And we work with a modernization of tax administration. But since 1 decade ago, we noticed that the biggest problems of tax administration is quality of data. Now, if you don't know your taxpayer, you don't know where they are doing, or you don't know where they are located, or their partners, or if the real owner of this firm, it's very difficult for tax administration to address these problems now in terms of region, because it is a problem common for the whole region. And we thought that we could improve now the quality of data. And it's important to mention that tax administrations have working very hardly to improve the quality of data using technology. Technology, digitalization, and it leads to data management. Of course, there are some tax administration, they have a more improvement than others because it depends on the budget, the size of tax administration, and also economic situation of the country. But we can mention, for example, in the other panel, in the presentation also Paul Martin has made, he mentioned electronic invoice. Electronic invoice started almost 20 years ago for Mexico, Brazil, Chile, but in the last decade have expanded for almost all tax administration in the region. And it's a huge step for tax administration because it brought a lot of data now to tax administration. And then they thought, what we are going to do with all this data? Now we need to understand how to deal with. And one step leads to another one. And then tax administration is starting now working with digitalization, not only IT, because when you think about technology, we think about hardware, but they needed to integrate database. Now they needed to integrate with database from other institutions now in the government. And also, we noticed that big data is starting now flowing now in tax administration. And then big data and analytics, we can see how it's changing, how tax administration operates in Latin America. Now the process has changed. With data analytics, tax authorities can better identify compliance risks, and manage enforcement strategy better. But as Juan mentioned in the beginning, it's a way to do this. It's not the outcome. Now it's a way to improve the outcome that we are expecting, and we're expecting better tax revenue, but better tax collection, decrease the tax evasion, and the other problems. And I think this data-driven approach now could be included in TADAT performance assessment criteria. I don't know how, but should be included, because we miss one tool to access the digital maturity of tax administration. Now we are doing this because now we are trying to find a way to access now the digital maturity. And also, I would like to mention, just 1 minute more, about mobile tax application, these apps that tax administration are developing in the region. Online portals, more friendly now to communicate, for the taxpayer to communicate with tax administration, how to reach also the taxpayer. And pandemic has accelerated. We know now that it has accelerated technological development in the region, making online taxpayer assistance more common in Latin America. And it has led now to this shift now in the region, developing new technologies and practices in response to the pandemic challenges. And also mention what you said before. These improvements should be reflected in TADAT framework, especially when we are evaluating efficiency and effectiveness of taxpayer communication, service delivery, and others. That's it.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you very much.
Just a heads up for the second round of questions. I'm going to reduce 2 minutes per speakers,
okay.
Because if not, we are not going to finish this. Okay? So you have thought about your question. 2 minutes to deliver. Marina, let's go to some kind of relationship here in the question to Monica and you, because Brazil has been particularly engaging in kind of technology innovation. And in general, in Latin America, as Monica was mentioned, this is an area of quite significant progress, but I know well the experience of Brazil, where the digitalization has been a priority and you have been investing a lot. So how the Brazilian experience in digitalization could or should be translated into the TADAT framework?
So thank you, Juan, for the question. And it's a big pleasure to be here celebrating TADAT. Thank you, Monica, for providing a strong foundation in our topic. So the Brazilian experience in digitalization was identified as one of our strengths in the TADAT assessment in 2020. And despite our complex legal framework and structural challenges, we have made significant advancements using technology. So, for example, I would like to mention 4 areas of technology use in Brazil that I believe strongly are related with the TADAT framework. First, the use of blockchain technology to exchange information in taxpayer registration process. Second, the use of chatbots and AI to guide taxpayers first in the customs services, but now this year to guide taxpayers in their income tax declarations. Third, the extensive Brazilian experience with the e-filing process, and particularly with the implementation of the public digital bookkeeping system and the electronic invoice. And finally, as our data volume expands, the use of technologies like data analytics, AI, and machine learning to improve processes like compliance risk management, audits, and dispute resolutions. Related to these examples, I would like to highlight some key points that I believe could contribute to TADAT. First, it could be interesting to emphasize the importance of interoperability standards and information exchange among government agents. Second, it seems prudent to include practices or indicators related to data security, data literacy, and data governance policies. Third, TADAT could also verify the capacity of tax administrations to stimulate real-time or close to real-time data collection or verification, and it would also be useful to evaluate how taxpayer services are integrated with the natural life cycle of people. And finally, it seems relevant to understand tax administration ability to become a truly data-driven organization, which means not only collecting data, but also using it to improve decision-making process and outcomes. To conclude, it's essential to remember that change is inevitable and that people must be in the center of this transformation. So the future should be inclusive and the future should be sustainable. So using technology and probably cooperation and using technology as a pathway to build a better society.
Thank you very much, Marina. So data-driven, but also people-driven.
Yes.
Good. Josué, Tuan just talked about expanding to that footprint globally, but in general, in Asia region has not have a kind of significant take-up to that. So what is your diagnostic and how we could kind of progress in the region, most populated nation in the world, but also combining with some very small countries, the Pacific. The changes that Paul mentioned during his presentation would help bring traction in the region. What is your views on this?
Thank you for the question. It's true. Historically, Asia lagged in the adoption of the TADAT during its first 5 to 6 years. However, over the past 4 years, we've seen a significant increase in its usage, especially since ADB has actively supported the dissemination of TADAT with support from the Domestic Resource Mobilization Trust Fund. In the Pacific region, out of 14 ADB member countries, only 3 have undergone TADAT assessments. This indicates a significant opportunity to expand TADAT initiatives in those economies. Based on our experience supporting tax administration reform in the Asia-Pacific region, we see their priorities such as digital transformation, international taxation, and compliance risk management aligned with global trends. The changes to the TADAT framework that Paul outlined should indeed help enhance these areas and increase engagement across the region. However, we've learned that TADAT assessments can be resource intensive, particularly for smaller Pacific economies with limited tax officials. Managing a 2 to 3 weeks assessment alongside regular operation is challenging. The geographic isolation of the Pacific also makes the development partners to visit frequently to the region. So it might be contribute to the slower TADAT adoption. To address these challenges, it would be beneficial for the revised field guide to explore more flexible assessment module and processes. For example, developing a simplified assessment framework could provide an entry point for smaller economies, allowing them to gradually embark on comprehensive assessments. Moreover, virtual assessments offer a potential solution due to their time and cost efficiency. ADB experienced the virtual assessment of Pakistan in 2021, and it was effective, although having at least one or a few team members on site is crucial for effective communication with government officials. Extending the assessment period through virtual means could also help alleviate resource constraints for smaller economies assessments. Thank you.
Thank you, Kusue. The reference you make regarding the participation of a kind of member of the revenue, the tax administration, somehow it's incorporated in the so-called assisted self-assessment, where sometimes part of the team of TADAT assessor is the administration that is assessed. But it's kind of something that has been performed, and it was performed particularly during the pandemic. And it's an interesting trend to continue improving. So now we are going to the second round of questions, and remember, 2 minutes. And I'm going to have here my timer. So, because we need to leave a little bit of time for discussion, okay? So, Deborah, Paul presented what are the considerations for the future TADAT. Kusue made some reference how she would like to see this in Asia. So what should the TADAT look like in the near future to better serve CD delivery? And remember, TADAT is a framework that we developed to better assist countries in reform agenda. So how this will help us in CD delivery? Deborah, 2 minutes.
Well, that was a very big question, so I'm boiling it down to 3 points, which may or may not answer your question. So my first point is about quality. TADAT is a quality product delivered in a very high quality manner, and we cannot let that slip. And so part of that is the quality of the assessors. And I was a bit amazed to know there's 626 assessors, because I couldn't count them on the website. There were too many. So I think a risk area, I'm thinking about risk rather than what the actual tool looks like, is how do we maintain the quality pool of assessors as it gets ever bigger and bigger and bigger. Mary, I know, mentioned this earlier as well. So I believe evaluations are done of the assessors, but you know, I'm a trained assessor. I did one TADAT 10 years ago, something like that. So would you send me on a, oh, no one's going to say, oh, it's being recorded. Oh my God. Anyway, would you send me on a TADAT tomorrow? That's a good question I can't answer. So second point I'd like to raise, which actually Kusue just touched on as well, and in a related way, and that's the use of TADAT in fragile and conflict-affected states. And I sort of like the idea of a simplified tool that maybe can be used in those environments. It can be overwhelming for them. They can fear that everything will be a D, so what's the point? Does it even help? So I think you know, how do we use this fantastic tool in these different environments? We use it in all sorts of environments, but for fragile states, all these very small economies, how can it be useful, and how do we manage using it in that environment? And my third point is actually about future expansion. So TADAT for customs, maybe not our space, but you know, I know the WCO takes the lead in standard setting around the world on customs, but is there a TADAT for customs? And the other one, which our colleague from Zambia really made me think about, was when there's an integrated revenue administration, like many of the revenue authorities in sub-Saharan Africa, you know, you're sort of assessing this bit of the operations, but they're so interrelated with the customs part, you know, can TADAT cope with that? Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Tuan, Paul mentioned that GovTech digitalization is under consideration with the several kind of specific issues. Which of these topics do you consider key to keep the tool relevant for tax administration? 2 minutes, please.
10-second, short answer is that I agree with everything that Paul already said. So all dimensions need to be considered in the new revamped TADAT. Now, let me talk a little bit about, more about this. First, about climate change. It is really the everyday, talk everywhere. And tax policy and tax administration have a role to play in that. In the impending, like it or not, but in the impending EU CBAM, right? The revenue administrations need to think about like what kind of strategy and how they can monitor and administer the evolving explicit, implicit carbon pricing regimes. And the other part in the area of digitalization, Monica already mentioned quite a bit about like the trending in Latin America, and that is also reaffirming the SNAP survey that the bank also conducted in the context of Asia. The administrations really think about like the digitalization creates like both challenges and also opportunities for them to think about, and they need to change. They need to prioritize at different maturity level of revenue administrations. So those are the things that need to be factored in. And the last point I would like to mention in here is that the TADAT, the current film guide, is quite comprehensive. I must say, look at that. It's a very comprehensive. And it already covers certain aspects of digitalization and also ICT in certain aspects, certain tax administration functions. And the question now is how we can make it more relevant, particularly now 10 years already passed. Digitalization, advanced technologies, and so on. That already put like the new, adding some sort of dimensions in like the setting of revenue administration. So how we can adapt the TADAT to measure, to assess those trending accordingly.
Thank you, Tuan. This is very interesting. So Monica, something we have heard sometimes is some tax authorities complain that TADAT actually doesn't assess their performance. And probably this is coming from the perspective that they are thinking in their organization, not in the tax administration system, which is an issue, of course. What are the areas of the tool that should be improved to better reflect the performance of tax administrations?
Yeah, it happens sometimes. Because tax administrators, normally they think only about tax administration, not the system. But especially there are two areas that, like I know that they complain a lot. It's tax dispute resolution, because sometimes now there are other institutions that or tribunal now that make part of this POA. But even if you are assessing, for example, the timeline, for resolve or solve the case, in tax administration, but it's the whole system. And sometimes what you can see is the legislation, it's in place, and everything is in place, but didn't work because the results or the outcomes are not good for tax administration. Then we need to explain it during the assessment and also during the final the meeting. And the other area they use to complain is debt recovery, or tax debt recovery, because also enforce the debt enforcement recovery. Now, in some tax administration, outside tax administration, they depend on the other institution to do this. And also, the outcome, it's not good for tax administration, especially because they don't have data. In tax administration, they don't have data what the other institution or organization is doing. And then, the outcomes are not good for these two areas. I think I would like to highlight, but there are others, and but that's it. It's time to rethink TADAT 2 for the future and incorporate some nuances of tax administration or the tax system.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point of controversy somehow, because
I know.
Because what apparently is happening is that we have not been, let's say, disseminating well that TADAT is about the tax administration system. So not only the tax authorities should be worried about this, it's more the overall government that there is different parts that are not directly responsibility of the tax administration. You mentioned the appeal system that typically goes beyond the tax authority. So this is something that maybe is for the Secretary to reflect, how we disseminate better what the framework is about. It's not about the tax department, sometimes very fragmented. It's about the tax administration system. Marina, from one of the kind of priority topic that has been also raised, Tuan mentioned digitalization, climate, but also another topic that has been more prominent is gender. From the Brazilian standpoint, can gender be considered a specific segment group of taxpayers toward which the tax administration must deploy specific services to be effective from a TADAT perspective? What is the Brazilian view on this?
To talk about gender in a panel with woman representation.
Good.
And I truly believe that women should be considered as a segment of taxpayers, and tax administrations play an important role in ensuring that gender-sensitive tax policies are designed to reduce barriers for women. So particularly women entrepreneurs often face unique challenges such as limited access to resources, and by recognizing these challenges, tax administrations can create targeted services to reduce gender disparities and help women meet their tax obligations. Some actions could be considered to promote gender policies, and like collecting and analyzing data disaggregated by gender, promoting financial literacy, considering ways to bring women into the formal sector, and promoting women within our organization. So from the Brazilian standpoint, gender issues are on our agenda, but initially our focus is more on integrating gender equality to ensure equal opportunities for all employees. Moving from a gender-responsive human resources policies to promoting gender-sensitive tax policies is our necessary next step. And the topic also needs to be integrated within a broader context of ESG policies. In conclusion, I firmly believe that representation matters in all scenarios. For example, even in the TADAT evaluation process, we should pay attention to gender-related topics. Considering that TADAT assessments involve key decision makers in tax administration, what would the gender balance look like if we took a picture during a TADAT evaluation? Taking Brazil as an example, a picture from 2024 would be significantly different from one taken in 2020, the moment of our assessment. Today, we would see a more gender-balanced representation, but we know there is still much more work to be done.
Thank you, Marina. I'm glad that you highlighted that the panel is so gender balance. Kozue, IDB through the Asian Pacific Tax Hub has been promoting a lot the knowledge sharing and DRM, collecting information in the region. How do you see the ever-growing volume of TADAT data helping countries and partners like the IMF, IDB to analyze and improve tax administration performance?
Thank you very much for discussing the Asia Pacific Tax Hub, or APTH. Established in 2021 under the strong leadership of the ADB President, Mr. Asakawa, APTH serves as an open and inclusive platform for strategic policy dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity development on domestic resource mobilization and international tax cooperation. As part of APTH activities, we published the comparative analysis of tax administration in Asia and the Pacific. The 7th edition of this series reports data and comments on administrative features and performance up to ISRA 2022 for 41 economies across the region. The analysis primarily relies on the ISRA data, supplemented by findings from TADAT assessments. A preliminary observation from TADAT assessments in the region identified 4 areas frequently receiving the lowest rating. First, efficient revenue management. Second, accurate reporting on declarations. Third, timely filing of declarations. And fourth, effective risk management. The insights from the ISRA and the TADAT findings have been invaluable in shaping our capacity building and the knowledge sharing programs, as well as our technical assistance initiatives. These analyses help us identify recurring issues and the challenges in regional tax administration, thereby enhancing the focus on the effectiveness of our programs. Moreover, the outcomes of the TADAT assessment directly benefit our core activities, such as the design and the implementation of the lending programs. The weakness highlighted by the TADAT assessments were utilized to develop policy actions to be implemented by the governments for loan disbursement. Given these benefits, ADB wholeheartedly supports the use of TADAT assessment and aims to participate in all assessments for our developing members. We are also pleased to collaborate with the TADAT Secretariat to organize events for disseminating updates to the field guide once finalized. Thank you.
Thank you, Kozue. I'm very glad to hear that our development partners are using TADAT framework to guide their reform kind of projects. We heard in the previous panel how EC really is using this framework, and I'm sure other partners. Something that I guess we need to work more is how to align the first TADAT assessment with the repeated assessment, something we discussed before, because the TADAT assessment is a diagnostic, a picture in one moment of time, but if we take picture in different moment of time, it's also kind of an assessment framework for kind of measuring if we do progress when we are undertaking reforms that are supported by partners, are supported by TA provider like us, etc. So because just taking one TADAT in isolation is just a picture in one specific point in time. But what we need to have is something that really is an evolving process. But reform by definition, institutional reform is an evolving process. So we have some minutes, 10 minutes for question and answers. So Catherine? please feel free to raise your physical hands.
Thank you so much. Is this working?
No. Maybe the other one behind you? Oh, now it's working. Now it's working.
Okay. So, wonderful panel, really interesting observations. So I have a couple of questions and just reflection. So for Kozue, we were talking about the Asia-Pacific Tax Hub, the role of the ADB, and our wish to have better coverage of TADAT in the Asia-Pacific region, which is quite diverse. We also heard today from our EC colleagues that there's an approach they're using of having several countries undertake the TADATs kind of together as a group, right? Be trained, undertake them, talk about the standards and their practices, and it's a kind of a very interesting new way of working on TADAT. So my question to you is, do you think that the Asia-Pacific Tax Hub could potentially play a similar role in promoting TADATs for multi-country TADATs in these small countries? So that's one question. And the other one is a reflection on TADAT, a simplified framework for TADAT for fragile and conflict-affected states, that perhaps without changing the TADAT framework itself, because as Andrea pointed out, it's really important to maintain that integrity, right, the end-to-end view. Perhaps one option would be to identify those aspects that are truly of a fundamental nature in all of this TADAT chain, rather than design something more simplified, but identify what's really fundamental and what's perhaps fancier, or for a tax administration that it's a separate level, you know, a little bit more advanced level of development. And that way you keep the structure, but you identify the fundamentals, and then you apply that sort of fundamental framework to countries that have, you know, that still have a way to go to strengthen their institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other question? I don't see any hands. Please.
Good afternoon. Supriyo from Revenue Administration 1. I had this part about the socioeconomic aspect is interesting, and I had a sort of a half question, half comment about it, is while gender is being taken into cognizance, what about age distinctions? Because especially when technology comes in, for the older generation, very often there is a techno-anxiety in dealing with it, and especially suppose you have pre-filled returns and one morning a person has this moment, you get up and you see that your return is pre-filled and it's not right, and there's something to be done. So if age is taken into account, my suggestion, it would be a good thing, because I remember anecdotally that when Singapore was computerizing their tax administration, they had special classes for the seniors to learn computers. That's my thought.
Thank you very much. Any other question? Okay, with the power that give me to be moderator, I'm going to ask first Kozue to address the question that Catherine raised, very concrete, how the experience of EC in doing this regional approach in countries could be applied to each. Deborah, I'm going to ask you for the second question, which is related to a simplified framework for TADAT. And Monica, and also Marina could contribute. You talk about digitalization and technology, and Supriyo was mentioned that, well, all people maybe struggle with this. So, okay, in that order, Kozue.
Oh, thank you. Actually, the multi-country approach is what I was very interested in when I saw the report, TADAT 10 years report. So I'd like to learn more about because in the Pacific region, as I said earlier, the virtual assessment or same level of the countries, there's a lot of countries. So I think the multi-country approach would be applicable to the Pacific regions. Thank you.
Yeah. I know a little bit about the experience of EC because we work with them in the context of the European Commission Southeast Europe program. And what is interesting in that experience is that they try somehow to use TADAT framework for EU member states in order to have an approach where they could assess all EU member states with a standard framework. DG Reform from European Commission provide funding to EU countries. And the idea is to align the project related to tax administration with a framework that is standard. So somehow they're trying to standardize the approach of tax administration across European Union members. So it's very interesting in that regard because it's indeed a regional approach. Deborah.
Thank you. I think on, is my mic? Yes, it is. On the fragile states, I'm sort of quite excited about Catherine's idea there that we strip out some core fundamentals from this and ignore the fancy stuff that the advice. So TADAT is going to become even more sophisticated in Field Guide 2025. It's going to be more cutting edge, you know, about using artificial intelligence or using all digitized responses. There's no more letters. There's no more phone calls. But in the less sophisticated, less mature administrations, these things are still really important. So I would hate to see some of those disappear. So maybe there is a sort of a core list of fundamentals that, you know, the basics, as I call them, that every administration should have. And there's only so much leapfrogging that can go on. And we've really learned this, I think, in our history of working with tax administrations, that yes, you can leapfrog, but often you can't leapfrog. You really have to get the basics in place before you can launch yourself further. So I think there's some good thinking we could do in that space. And just on the regional project, I was just last week at the IOTA conference where Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece were there. So they shared some of their experiences of doing this, you know, in threesome, in like a tandem with the three countries, you know, all coming together to get the training, you know, coming back together after the event, discussing their own experiences. I think it's quite hard for them to reveal their weaknesses, but I think in terms of sharing strengths, it's been quite successful. So depending on the countries you have and how comfortable they feel with each other, to really share the full experience of the TADAT is part of the equation of who you put together, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Just one reflection, and I want to go back again to what we have been discussing, and I am being stressing that, again, the focus is on outcomes. It's not in the good practice. The good practice could produce good outcome, but if we start measuring how much artificial intelligence a tax administration could have, that would be the wrong approach. But because the tax administration has to deliver outcomes. With artificial intelligence, maybe it's better, but if we are going to assess a fragile state on the filing and payment, what we want is they have a high rate of filing and payment. This is what we want. It's not that if they use artificial intelligence or not for doing that. It's do they have a high filing and payment? So in this regard, going to basic is very key, not just be kind of blind by the use of technology or the like. So I would like to stress this. Monica, on the all people and the challenges of digitalization.
People and challenges.
All people like us, by the way.
Yeah, like us, struggling with this artificial intelligence and the other things. But I think that's important to consult the taxpayer. When they are tax administration are developing new tools or like a pre-filled declaration or other things, talk to the taxpayer and ask them like for improvements because the objective is, in my opinion, talking about our experience, is improve the experience and decrease or reduce the taxpayer compliance cost, not increasing this stress to deal with tax administration. There are some I would like to stress in the Marina can complete this. There are some tax administration that are still working remotely. Most of the tax officials are working remotely, and it's a mess for taxpayers to contact the tax administration, or by phone or by I don't know. For some, it's very difficult to have like an in-person meeting, and we should like reflect about it. Now, how digitalization is improving now the experience for taxpayers, because of course it's good for tax administration in some point, now, but also for taxpayers, how they are accepting and incorporate it in their daily activities.
That has to be very short. Okay. So Marina, would you like to intervene? Monica said,
About this
small
taxpayer
point.
experience. Yeah.
Monica said that she was speaking from her opinion, I guess, not from IDB.
No, not for my opinion, my experience. Experience.
So I believe the future is hybrid. So we need in tax administrations use different strategies to design our services and how we interact with the taxpayers. So we need to understand communication is common for everyone, and we need to understand how taxpayers prefer to communicate and speak the same language of them.
So clearly, tax administration cannot escape the need to provide targeted service to different group of taxpayers, and they had to be customized. So Tuan, any final work on your side?
I'm not so sure, it is a really final word, but I would like to come back to the really tough question about like how we can really reconcile between the need for rigorous assessment for like advanced, more measured revenue administration, and for those that are really in the fragile, conflict, affected states. Now, I think that I really fully, in line with what Andrea mentioned, that we need to have some sort of the integrity and the uniformity in the assessment across. And the TADAT, that is really designed to measure outcomes. So in each of the POA, we have like the measurement, dimensions, we have the indicators. So even we come to like really, the administration with very, early stage and, really poor administration, we still like have some sort of the description of the outcomes from each of the POA. And here I would like to relate to really the other point that really raised from the last year midterm review. The point is that maybe here we want to make sure that we link like the TADAT findings with the complementary TAs, capacity building, and or maybe like a landing operations here. But we need to bridge that. So the midterm review also mentioned that maybe we can have some sort of the post PAR, the post performance assessment report after the TADAT. So that can be used, that can be developed and prepared in discussion with revenue administrations post TADAT to identify the key weaknesses in the context of the country, in the context of the specific administration, and see what kind of the actions, what kind of the reforms, what kind of sequencing might be appropriate for the country. So that's really some sort of reconciling between the rigorous and some sort of the suitable practical assessment.
Thank you very much, Tuan. Being 5:30, we are just in time finishing our panel. I ask a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Thank you.